Hello, guys. We're here with Family Show, Season 2, Episode 3. And with me today, I have an author, John Jack. And you wrote a book called Letters to Myself. And it's got 21 essays, you said in there. Um, but I'm always fascinated. Like, one of the things I like to ask people is if you could go back in time, would you believe yourself of where you're at right now? So it's kind of fascinating to find a book like having letters to yourself. Um, Looking at both angles of that, it's almost like would you still live the same life even if you had the letters to yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's letters to my former self. So it's the idea is that if you were able to make contact with yourself, your 80 or 85-year-old self, what would they say to you, and how would they advise you to not so much to live your life, but how to handle the situations that life sort of throws at you? Because the book poses the idea that even if you were able to speak to yourself in the future, you still have free will. You may not end up as them. You still make your own
Mm-hmm.
choices. So they're giving you the knowledge of their wisdom and advice, but it's up to you as to whether you take it or not. You know.
Right. And what are some ones that if you had the chance, like if you had five of those letters you could send back to yourself, which five would you choose to be like these are the ones that'll make the most impactful change?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I'll tell you that that's actually an impossible question to answer, and I'll tell you why. I wrote that book for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote it. I originally wrote it about 10 years ago in 2009. I was going through a particularly difficult period in my own life, and my father had passed away, and my grandfather had passed away, and so I had no elder figure that I could sort of relate to and could sort of get advice from. So I kind of wrote one for myself. So rather than picking 4 or 5, all 21 of those essays were written to me. And it was only later on that I came across the idea of publishing it and went part of the way down that road traditionally. And I had a literary agent and we were working on it. And then my mother passed away, and I sort of shelved it for a long, long time until COVID happened. And then I kind of thought, okay, this is something that could make a difference in people's lives, I guess. And so I sort of started working on getting it out there. But the whole thing was written by me, kind of to me, you know.
Yeah, and I can kind of understand that then because my dad died when I was 20,
Mm.
and so I didn't realize like how much advice I wish I could have got from him as I got older.
I was
Because you're
20.
more willing to listen to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're more willing to listen to advice when you get older too, and so it'd be nice to have that advice around, and then it's not around. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that'd be a good book for people to pick up if you don't have a father figure around for advice on that.
And I
And
think as
what?
well, I think as well that we get, what we have this concept now of the quarter life crisis. People used to talk about the midlife crisis, and I'm kind of getting to that age now. But
Mm,
we have this phenomenon now of the quarter life crisis, where the world that we live in is so technologically advanced, it's so fast paced, it is so uncertain in so many different ways. Even before COVID and all the madness of that, the uncertainty of the housing market, of the job market, and the way that we're sort of bombarded with images of success and extraordinary wealth, extraordinary beauty, that we kind of feel that that's the norm rather than our life being the norm. And so now we're seeing
right.
people about 25 to 30 having this kind of strange first time crisis instead of waiting till their 40s, 45, 50 before they have a midlife crisis. So we're having people really losing their sense of direction in their sort of mid-20s and early 30s, and that's a fairly modern phenomenon. I don't think that's something that our parents or our grandparents' generation would have recognized.
Right. Well, you, it's in a time and place where everybody wants to show off the best about everything too. So all
Sure.
you ever see is the best of somebody else's life. You don't see the
That's it.
bad parts of it. So you go,
That's it.
well, what's wrong with my life? That's all I see is the good in everything. And
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it'll get to your mind for sure if
Mhm.
you let it.
Yeah,
Um,
we kind of live in a kind of we have two lives, don't we? We have an online avatar persona, and most of us are keyed into that now. Even the older generation have usually at least got Facebook, and then as you
mhm,
move backwards, it gets into Instagram and Twitter, and they're all great. I mean, I've got all of those, and I thoroughly enjoy them. But I wonder how honest we are in what we put forward. I know that I'm not always, I try and put my best foot forward on social media. Of course I do. So
right.
you're absolutely right. But all we're ever seeing, you're right, all we're ever seeing is the best of people. We're never seeing what's happening behind the scenes. So we've kind of got a skewed idea, and that's fed by the media as well. Insanely beautiful, skinny people on the front of magazines, and we feel that we have to look like that, or we've
Right.
got to maybe. Oh, we've got to have made our
Oh, I
first
go ahead.
million by the time we're 22 or whatever.
Right, right. And then, well, they that's where the old keeping up with the Joneses, because all you had really to look at as the best foot forward was your neighbors, really. That was all there was. But now you're
Mhm,
looking at a bunch of Joneses all the time, and
mhm,
so it can get your self-esteem down. And
mhm.
Justin and Christina's RV van life says your life is mostly about what you focus on.
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
whatever you focus on. What started your path of writing this book? Did you just write one letter to yourself and then it kind of snowballed from there?
That's exactly what happened. As I said, gone through a period of, I guess you'd call it a bit of a dark night of my own soul. And
Mm,
I'd kind of stopped various behaviors and habits that were not very healthy for me at the time. This would be in 2009. And one of the things that I'd done was I'd stopped drinking and I'd entered a 12-step program. I'm very open and honest about that. And I've broken my anonymity about that many times.
mm,
And during that journey of sort of recovery, I undertook, because I'm an actor. That's, I work in the arts anyway. That's what I do. And my mother was a writer, and she was a Christian writer, religious writer. So I grew up around spiritualism and the idea of writing being very normal. And I took a sort of an artsy kind of development course. Wasn't necessarily specifically for writers. It's quite a famous course. A lot of creative people do it. And one of the
mm,
exercises that was involved in that was to write a letter to yourself from the age of 80. And there was another exercise as well where you kind of wrote a letter to yourself from I think, the age of 5 or something. And I did both. The one from the age of 5 was interesting, but it didn't really capture my imagination. But the one from 80 really did. It was extraordinary for me, and I think I detail it in the introduction to the book as to what that letter did for me, and I referred to it a lot in the coming months, and over time I began to think, there's something else in here, that kind of that wise old voice came awful. I don't know what that says about me as a person, but that wise old voice came
right.
through very, very easily, and I kind of thought. There's more to this. And so I set out with a kind of nebulous idea of maybe writing a few letters and seeing how it went. And it became 21 treatises, if you like, 21 essays, 21 letters to me from this very gentle, wise, um, older figure of the ages. It was very comforting, and I remember writing the final words. The very final chapter is called Final Words, and after the months of being with this voice and this kind of personality, this being by my side and my constant companion in writing, I remember writing the final words in that book and crying, because it really, by the end of that, really felt like I was saying goodbye to a friend, and it was for a while. So yeah, so for me, it was absolutely, you're absolutely right. It came out of an exercise.
Was there one um, letter that was more difficult to write, like just to put down on paper than some others?
Yes. And in fact, I'm writing a follow up to it, a second volume at the moment, and I had exactly that situation over the last few weeks. Probably the most difficult letter of the first volume to write, strangely enough, was actually the final words. It was the saying goodbye. I never wrote this book initially. I never wrote this book with the idea of necessarily giving it to anyone. It was I don't know, a form of therapy for me, and so saying goodbye to that character was really, really, really tough. It was. I remember feeling quite desolate. Actually, I wrote that final chapter sitting in a Starbucks coffee. I don't know if I'm allowed to. Am I allowed to say trademark names? Is that okay?
Yeah, you remind me to say that. Don't bother me any.
I was sitting in that coffee shop, and I'm not sure the branch still exists. It's in Southwark, in London, and I remember sitting there. I remember longhand writing out the final words of that, putting that pen down, and really feeling like my friend, my mentor, had sort of gone away. So that was tough. But they all bring their challenges because at the end of the day, much as it's wisdom is opinion. At the end of the day, there's no absolute to anything. And so, you're always writing your truth, but you're always thinking, is this everyone's truth? So I try to be tough with myself in all of the chapters, and that, I was keeping my experience to a minimum and trying to be as universal in the way that I wrote it as possible, on the off chance that anyone ever did read it.
Right. And that's hard to keep sometimes too, is the authenticity when you do stuff. It's hard to keep it up because you're also questioning yourself at the same time,
Sure.
and so it becomes that observer effect that they talk about, how that can affect things. Now are you being an observer of the observer, and all that stuff down the road. Where have you where have you been as far as with topics in that first book that you didn't touch on that you're going to be touching on in the second book?
Oh, there are loads, because with all the best will in the world, I wrote that first volume when I was 29, and I'm 40 now. And with age comes not necessarily more wisdom. I think that wonderful phrase, out the mouths of babes, is very true. I've heard extraordinary wisdom come out of the mouth of children, let alone young adults. So I'm not sure that the age necessarily automatically brings wisdom, but it certainly brings experience, and it brings a different perspective to things. And there is, I have a colleague and a friend who, and I will touch on this, who really is quite, I don't think in this second volume, I'm planning a third volume as well, and I think this might come in then, but they really want me to talk about aging. And I'm 40, and that would require a lot of research in the doing of that to speak with any kind of authority on it. I'd need to speak to people of a certain age, so there are topics that I've deliberately waited before I've touched. And there are topics which I'm not touching yet, aging being one of them. So yeah, there are, and there are topics in there as well. In the second volume, I talk about depression. I talk about anxiety. I talk about things which are quite dark, subjects which are quite dark, but which are seemingly endemic in today's society. And I'm not sure that I would necessarily, at that time in my life, have been brave enough to have tackled those subjects. Whereas I don't quite feel that way today. So I think with that decade of difference, there's a slightly broader perspective there.
I have to agree with you, because when I was in my 20s, I didn't want to admit, because you get that as a young guy, that macho, I want to be strong or whatever, and so you want to ignore any problems that are wrong with you, even if you can kind of see they're there. And then when you get older, you're like, I'd rather fix it and be done with it, and then get on with it. I don't view it the same as being weak, as it's something that's got to be fixed.
And also, Bob, I don't know about
And
you. I find as I get older, I don't care so much what other people think.
yeah,
I, I just don't.
yeah,
It's one of the great gifts. You lose the collagen and you lose the hair and all the kind of superficial things that you're really tied onto in your youth. You start to lose that, but you do gain confidence and you gain an inability to give a toss in many ways. Not necessarily in a disrespectful way, but just in a
mhm,
I don't need validation in the way that I used to in my 20s, and I think that
right,
allows them to be more authentic.
right. It also it makes you realize. Um, kind of makes me laugh when I get older about the insurance companies charging younger guys more money, and it's like, well, I kind of understand because the older guy usually, if they're somebody challenges them at a race stoplight, I'm like, I don't care, you can beat me, good for you. But when you're younger, you're like, I gotta beat this guy. So
Mhm.
that, yeah, it just changes over time, and when you're talking about perspective, I talk about that all the time. How just a different way of looking at things can
Yeah.
change your whole emotions about it. You can go from being angry about something to just laughing about something, you know. Um, and I talk about just perspective in your mind. It changes how you hear things as well,
Mhm.
like your words or anything like that. And Papa Drews wants to know if you're Irish or Scottish.
I'm Scottish. I'm speaking to you
All right.
from the city of Glasgow in Scotland.
Well, then you'll find this really interesting. Then I found out my brother did one of those genetic tests. And I found out that I'm the whatever great grandson of Robert the Bruce.
Oh, wow. Gosh.
So,
Yeah. Congratulations, my liege.
yeah, I didn't find that out until late in life, and it was surprising to me. And then just finding out the history of him and how he inspired people with just talking. I'm like, well, if he can do it, then it's in my blood somewhere to just be able to talk and inspire people. So, you know, why not? And then because I found out that, or at least this is what it was put when I read about it, was that whole try and try again, motto was
The
basically him in
spider.
this cave with the spider.
Spider. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a very famous story. Yeah, I'm not sure how true it is historically, but it's certainly
right,
it's a parable of Robert the Bruce. Yeah, yeah.
right, right. Yeah, it was just interesting to find out, and that's um, is that stuff like included in some letters that you found out about yourself as years went by, that you'd included letters to your younger self being like, hey, take it easy because you have this issue, or you're a little bit better at this.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the letters in the not in the first volume, but the second volume I'm writing at the moment is about perseverance. It's I as a young actor, I remember an older actor saying to me, "There's no great providing you have a modicum of talent and you don't look like the back end of a bus, there's no
Mm-hmm.
great alchemy, there's no great magic to making it in this business. It's simply the ability to hold on long enough. Because what you find is, as you move up each generation, you come in and you're the spear carrier, and then you move on to the young romantic leads, and then you get a bit older and you play this character. And as you move through the generations, your colleagues fall away. They get married, they have children, they have to take other jobs to support their
Mm-hmm.
family and this kind of stuff. And before you know it, the pool gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And you kind of, by volition purely of your perseverance, you kind of end up in a good position. So I think that's true of a lot of things in life. There's a wonderful, I lived in London for 15 years. I moved back to Scotland about 2 years ago. And I used to work in the East End of London near Shoreditch, around Shoreditch. And as I would walk up Shoreditch High Street, on the left or the right hand side, depending on which way you're coming, there is a building, and it's called Perseverance Works. And I used to think, yeah, it does. Absolutely, it does. Perseverance really does work, and so I've written a chapter about that. And I think that's for me. That's true. I think if you keep banging away at something or chipping away at it, eventually something gives. Eventually.
Yeah, yeah, eventually for sure. I just realized I just had looked, and I've already done 400 videos on YouTube in a year and 3 months. So, when people talk about I haven't made it yet, I'm not getting anywhere. That's exactly what you're talking about is perseverance. You just got to keep plugging away at it.
Well,
Have you?
I think it was it. I think it was Bette Midler who said, and I may be wrong, I may be attributing that to the wrong person. I think it was Bette Midler who said, it took me years to become an overnight success.
Mm,
You
hmm
know?
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of musicians the same way. Like, well, you have a hit record. Well, yeah, but I've been playing for 10, 12 years, all this, and I finally have a hit record. Yeah, you're right.
That's
Overnight.
it. Yeah.
What when you're talking about going through the generations as doing the acting, has that also been an enjoyable thing for you to do, play each one of those roles as you come up into it? And has it helped you in life, like the stories that you've read to act out? Has that kind of made you have a different perspective in your life about things?
I think it's the opposite way around. I think my life has helped my acting. I think as actors, we're kind of we're like little storehouses of emotions and little vignettes of life. So you kind of become second nature. You don't really realize you're doing it, but often I'll be sitting on a train or in a restaurant, or I don't know, just walking down the street, and I'll see something, or I'll hear someone talk, or I'll hear a certain dialect, or I'll see someone's personality, and I'll be thinking, and somewhere, it's not always cognitive, but somewhere that gets
Mm,
stored in there. And I've got a little sort of catalogue of personalities and isms, that I can draw on, to build a character. And sometimes I come out with things and I'll kind of go, gosh, I think that was someone that I saw 10 years ago. I remember that in that cafe. And I find this person coming back to me now in the building of a character. So rather than sort of learning from the job, for my life, I think my life helps me in doing my job. Actually, I'm not sure I could be an actor if I'd lived a life of solitude. You need a reference. You particularly when you're playing a lot of different people. You're always copying. You're copying life.
mm,
It would be very difficult. If I'd sort of grown up on the top of a mountain somewhere, I don't think I could be an actor because I would have nothing to reference those characters with.
right. I was talking with Freddie Fry Motivation, and I was kind of laughing with him because there's the commuter way of life, which is you just work 9 to 5 or whatever, and then there's the scenic route of life, which is where you have all these stories and memories, and you have a lot more memories because you didn't take the easiest route to where you're at right now. And so, yeah, having something like that to reference for coming up with characters.
You've probably seen that wonderful graphic. It does the rounds on Facebook sometimes, and it's two graphs, and it shows you what people think success looks like, which is, and I'll try and which way am I going? It kind of goes sort of like that. That's what
Right.
people think it looks like, but what it actually looks like is that.
Yeah.
There is no direct line toward success. And success is a kind of undefinable thing as well, because it's one of those words. It's a bit like happiness. It's one of those words that means what it means to you.
Right.
What is success? What is happiness? And what happiness or success is to one person may be failure or misery to another. So
Right.
it's very subjective. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, life is for me a real combination of, it's a journey. It's a bit of a cliche to say that, but it's true. And it's a collection of experiences, and a lot of my experiences have gone into this book, and a lot of other people's experiences have gone into this book as well. And like I say, for me, the book was always about trying to pull all this together in my head. So it's a very personal thing to share, and it's quite scary actually as well to share something that is as personal as what this is, because it's me talking to me. It's a very private conversation that I'm kind of putting out there for other people. So yeah,
right. And the book is called Letters to My Former Self, and I'm talking with John Jack, and you can find that on Amazon and bookstores and all that stuff.
You can.
Have you have you had anybody that's like written to you or met you that's read your book that has changed the direction of their life from reading some of your stories?
I mean, the book is in the process of being published at the moment. The Kindle edition is out there, and the hardback is the hard copy, this paperback,
Right.
is on slight hold for the moment. You can sort of, I think, go on and sort of show your interest on it, but it will hopefully be available very, very shortly. But in terms of, I have shared it with people privately over the years, and I have had people come up and say, yes, this has certainly changed the way I look at things. I'm not necessarily sure that anyone's ever come to me and said that it's changed their lives, because, and maybe I shouldn't say this, it's not that kind of book. It's not, there's nothing in this which is groundbreaking. There's nothing in this which is, it's not going to split the atom. What this is
Right.
it's very, very warm and wise wisdom, which I think a lot of us are already aware of most of it, but we don't know that we know. Mm-hmm. And I think for me the best way of looking at that is how we speak to ourselves and how we talk to other people. And I find myself often sort of scratching my head and thinking, what am I going to do with this problem, and how am I going to fix it? And I've got this issue and I've got that issue, and I'm mulling it over and mulling it over. But if someone else comes to me with the same problem, it's no difficulty. All of a sudden, I'm a guru, and this is what you need to do, and that's what it's all in there. But I think we find it very difficult to access it for ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I think we talk to ourselves differently than we talk to other people. I think we're a lot less kind to ourselves than we are to other people, and I think that we tend to think that the advice that and the wisdom that we share with other people is not applicable to ourselves. And so, what I mean in terms of this book not being life changing is that it's not going to show you how to make £1 million. It's right. It's not going to show you how to heal a terminal illness. It doesn't pretend to be any of those things. What it is a guide for living. And sure, that's transformative, absolutely, but it's there to walk beside you in your life. It's not there to change your life. Do you see what I mean? So it's yeah. If someone came to me and said, your book is the book that I keep by my bed and I read a chapter in the morning and it gets me ready for the day, that's my book's job done. It's right. That kind of companion. It's a companion to life.
Right. And I always tell people, the biggest thing in depression and suicide is feeling alone. And so when you share stories with people, it's really hard to do, but it's therapeutic for, at least it was for me. It was probably therapeutic for you to be like, at least it made me feel like I'm over that part of my life, to be able to share all that stuff that went on. It's able to help other people not feel alone. So like you're saying, if they can read a chapter of your book, oh, I'm going through this tough time. Oh, I'm not the only one that's felt that way before.
Absolutely. And I think, let's be honest, Bob, this is a tough gig. This is, people are not only now dealing with their personal demons, they're dealing with societal and the demons of humanity right now. We're facing a global pandemic. I'm living in a country that's dealing with its exit from the European Union and the chaos that's causing. You're dealing with political upheaval in America. We're dealing with real societal issues, serious stuff right now that's in the macro as well as the micro. We're living with our own stuff in our heads, and it's being impacted by this stuff, but we're also dealing with the day-to-day physical realities of it. We can't even take a breath of air at the moment without worrying that it's going to kill us, frankly. So this is a really, really hard time to be alive. There's no two ways about that. And I think for me, if someone were to say to me, I can give you access to a mentor figure, I can give you access to a voice which is warm, it's wise, it's understanding, it's been there before you. It knows what you're going through, and it knows how it works out. Not for you, but it knows how it works out in the general. Then that's something that I would think I would jump at, to be honest, right now, because the world's going through, all of us, for the first time, and certainly I think since the Second World War, we're all going through something as a world which is utterly uncertain. And we don't know when normality is going to resume, if ever. And so a book like the one that I've written, and that's why when lockdown was announced, I made a determination that I would get this book out there, because this kind of book, we as individuals need this kind of voice right now. We need someone to put an arm around us and say, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Right. Whatever happens, we're going to deal with this. There's an awful lot of scaremongering out there, an awful lot of, the media telling us that this is a new normal. We will never be the same again. I saw an article recently that said New York will never recover from this. I mean, this real scaremongering. And as humans, we're going through a tough time, but for 10,000 years, humanity has come through plagues and wars and pestilence and violence. We will get through this. It's going to be tough. And it's very difficult for people who have illnesses and mental illnesses and physical illnesses, or financial disadvantagement or whatever. But we will get through this. And I think if my book does anything for people, it will hopefully help to keep people afloat long enough to see the other side.
Yeah, and like you're saying, we've been through a lot. I mean, you can read if you really go in and read some of the stories in the Bible, that you can see some of the stuff that happened way back then happen again, like leprosy. That's one of the original social distances right there.
Sure.
And so the doom and gloom of everybody thinking that humanity's doomed. It's like, no, humanity the things change throughout time. But time doesn't change.
Absolutely.
That's the one thing it's constant.
As long as humanity has a thirst for living, as long as people are entrepreneurial, as long as people are they say that necessity is the mother of invention, and we're seeing that now. Look at the way we've learned to communicate through things like Zoom. I mean, my God, if I'd known 7 or 8 months ago what was going to happen, I'd have put a couple of £1,000s into Zoom, because I'd be a millionaire by now. The way that we've managed to circumnavigate only within a few months, we will get through this. We will find ways of dealing with this. And like I say, this book is your companion in keeping your head afloat just long enough to see the tide settle. And people, they say that people often give up just as they're about to make a breakthrough. And this is something which I hope will be just that little voice on the shoulder that says, keep going. We can do this together.
Yeah, that's what I tell people. I mean, if you feel like giving up, well, then why not just wait at least one day, right? What's one more day if you want to give up anyway? And then you never know what's going to happen in that day that may change your mind.
Well, if you've ever spent a night out in the countryside, I grew up in the countryside. I live in the city now, but I'm a real country boy. I grew up around fields and haystacks and farms, and the smell of manure being spread at this time of the year. And anyone who's really lived or been out in the countryside, away from the street lights, away from light pollution, will know that the old saying that the night is darkest just before the dawn is absolutely true. The real darkest portion of the night, when there is no unnatural light from the city, when you're out in the countryside, the real darkest portion of the night is just before the dawn breaks over the horizon. And I think that's a lovely metaphor for life. I think that's often true. People give up just as they're about to make that breakthrough. And we're facing a situation as a society right now where we could throw in the towel. Nothing is like we're used to it being. But we're not doing that. We're finding other ways, and we will get through this. And if my book can be a companion to someone on that journey, then so much the better.
Yeah. It's just if you stop looking for all the negative, you can start finding positive everywhere in the world. Positive little things that happen in front of you every day, but it's almost like you get programmed to look at the negative because that's what you're viewing all the time. So it's a lot easier to see. Kind of like when you change a vehicle and you see the same your vehicle everywhere.
We have a choice in the way that we respond. At the end of the day, I am responsible for my own life. And sick or well, unless I'm certified insane, I have responsibility over my own life and my own choices, my actions, and most importantly, my thoughts. It's not always easy, but I do. And it's true. For some people, every silver lining really does have a cloud. And it's for me, staying positive, particularly at times like this. It's not easy for anyone right now because we're so uncertain. And the one thing human beings are not great with is uncertainty. Nobody's good with uncertainty. I've never heard anyone say my ideal state is an uncertain one. Never heard anyone say that. And we're living with it on an individual, on a societal, on a national and a global level right now. And so it's tough. It's really hard, but we'll get through it. We're resilient creatures. And we are already finding ways of getting around it, and we will come through this, and we will live normal life again. It may be a year, it may be 2 years, it may be 5 years, but we will have holidays again. We will be able to meet up without social distancing again. But it's holding on until we get there.
And I told people too, you're gonna now just like well, my grandparents are a little older than most people my age, but they went through the Depression and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, you're gonna have stories from this that you get to now pick on the younger generation. Like, we went through a time when we had to do all this and we couldn't go outside, so you should be happy about it.
That's right. You can talk about the best description I ever heard of this period that we're living through, this history that we're living through, is the Great Pause.
That's a good term for
it. Isn't it good? And for me, what that did is it sort of reframed what was a really, I read that very close to the beginning of the lockdown. And, people were dying in huge numbers, and no one knew how long this was going to last. And, we were told it was going to be 3 weeks, but we kind of knew it was going to be longer than that. And, the police were monitoring who left their house and for how long and what for. It was really scary stuff. And I remember reading this description of it as the Great Pause. And this person who'd written this article and called it that had reframed it and said, this is a real opportunity for humanity to stop and to take stock of where it's going, to stop this relentless juggernaut towards more, always, it never stops, the momentum of the snowball. And all of a sudden, we've been forced to stop. And we've been forced to pause, and we've been forced to look around. And in that sense, although we've come through something that's very traumatic, and we're still coming through it, and I think it is traumatic for society, and I think there will be a payoff down the road for that. But in terms of the big picture, without negating how awful it's been, and it has been, but in terms of the good that can come out of this, I think it's no bad thing that humanity has been forced to stop and take a long, hard look at itself and the way it conducts itself.
Right. Yeah. And when you're talking about payoff, I think I read, and I'm not sure if it's 100% correct, but Shakespeare wrote most of his plays when they had the plague and you couldn't do anything. So think of all the movies that we should be getting out of this that maybe aren't repeats of the same old stories, because now people have had time to sit there and write new scripts, new stories.
Absolutely. And I think it will, again, it's that necessity being the mother of invention thing. My industry has ceased. I mean, it's the theatres are closed. There's very little filming going on. It's really been hit hard financially, my industry, by people not being able to physically do the stuff that we do, or even if we can do it, they can't go and see it in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But what it has done is it's you're absolutely right. It's made people artistically entrepreneurial, and to think outside the box. And the arts traditionally, as a not necessarily commercially, but as a philosophy, as a genre, has always flourished during times of oppression.
Mm-hmm.
And it's. I think we will see a flourishing of the arts that will come from this, and a flourishing of creativity. It may not be the type of commercial arts that we've known thus far, but the arts are not tied into the money making box office hits. It is a greater thing than that. And I think that in terms of artistic output, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're going to see a bit of a renaissance over the next few years that will come from people having the time to stop and to think and to practice their art. I hope so,
Right.
anyway.
Right. Yeah, I hope so too. It'd be one nice thing to get out of this, because it's it seems, and when people talk about the stuff repeating, well, if everybody's comfortable and nobody's forced to change anything, they're going to stick with what's comfortable. It's the same as you. If something's working for you, even though it might be better for you to do something a different way, you're still going to be comfortable just doing the same method. That's why a lot of businesses fail after so long. That's why a lot of things happen, just because people take the easy, comfortable way. And I think it's going to force movie studios, everybody, because you're saying, they're taking a hit right now. Well, they're going to have to come out fighting and figure out ways to get people to go to movies, get people, to go to that kind of entertainment. It's going to force them to adapt. So it's going to be a little pain for a little while. But I think it's going to come out stronger in the end.
Yeah, and listen, Bob. Hopefully, kinder. I hope that we can come out of this with a kinder world.
Yeah.
Because it's made us reassess our priorities. And I think there is an element of us having to. There's nothing wrong with nothing at all wrong with seeking prosperity, seeking success.
Mm-hmm.
But I think as a world, we've become somewhat obsessed with more for more's sake, and this has prevented that. It's prevented exponential growth for the sake of exponential growth, and often, I'm not just talking about my industry, but I think across the board, often that exponential growth is at the cost of the quality of the product, and I think if we see a renaissance in business and in culture, in societal connection, all that's brought us closer together. All of a sudden, we had so many people, I don't know about America, but in this country, we had so many people volunteer as NHS volunteers to support the NHS. They weren't able to use them all. They weren't able to use a fraction of them. I volunteered, was never used. So all of a sudden, people stepped up to the plate in a way that normal times, ordinary times wouldn't have called for. And so I hope that we perhaps may begin to take each other a little bit more seriously as human beings, rather than commodities, people to sell to, people to help us to get something for ourselves, that we might be able to rebuild something of a society after this again.
Yeah. I have hope in that. My sister-in-law is a ER nurse, and she's been pregnant this whole time, going and doing work at the ER this whole time. And when they were close to running out of masks, a bunch of people stepped up and started sewing masks and all that kind of stuff. And so that it just right then at the start of it, it just changed my perspective on it and made me go, there's going to be a lot of bad, but it's just going to be okay in the end, because when it comes down to it, more people are I at least I believe there's more good in people than there are bad in people when it comes down to push comes to shove.
I think so. And I think, unfortunately, though, as human beings, often we need a bit of a shove, don't we? And that's what this pandemic has kind of woken us all up to a certain extent, hasn't it? We've been sort of bumbling along quite nicely, and then we've had the shock of our lives with this. I mean, I genuinely think as a society we're traumatized by this. I do, and like I say, I think we'll see the piper will have to be paid eventually for that. I think I think the ramifications of this for people's mental health will go on for longer perhaps than we might want it to. But in terms
Sure.
of resetting society, I think good can come out of that. This is a ghastly situation, and it's tragic and it is traumatic, and it's people have died in their hundreds of thousands. But out of that, perhaps we can build something which is a bit more mindful.
Right. Yeah, I hope that people get the mindful part of it and just appreciate the fact that you're alive, and maybe I would hope anyway everybody should realize at this point that you can make plans for things, but that's not what's going to necessarily happen. Because
Ah,
something like this can happen, and your plans aren't going to turn out the way you think they are. I would hope at least give people more mindfulness on that to be like, hey,
my
this is a path, but we'll see where it goes.
my editor for the book, Paddy Navin, her mother she's 93, and she still smokes like a chimney. And she has a wonderful saying as she sits in her chair with her cigarette. She's a fabulous grand old dame, and she will often pronounce, cigarette in hand, "What man proposes, God disposes." And what she means is absolutely what you just said. The plans that we make are, often life has other plans, and that's
Yeah,
kind of sometimes you have to deal with those curveballs.
yeah, and it's something that I think I at least I've noticed, like anybody that's had trouble in their life or had a lot of issues in their life, they seem to be handling this a lot better than people that haven't had a lot of trouble in their life because they haven't had to deal with a setback before, it seems like.
Absolutely. Someone said to an actor friend of mine said the other day, actors are so much more equipped to deal with this than people who work in other industries because we've lived with insecurity all of our professional lives. We've actors, and unless you are in the multi-millionaire bracket of actors, and I certainly don't fall into that bracket, unless you're there, then you know what uncertainty is. And even those who are in that bracket generally have come through years of uncertainty to get into that bracket. And so
Hmm.
we know what it is to live with uncertainty. And so I think we do have, certainly I can only speak for actors, I think we do have perhaps a better skill set of tools from our day-to-day life to deal with a situation like this, whereas people who have the security of the 9 to 5, the monthly paycheck, the mortgage comes out on this date and that date, perhaps they will struggle with it a bit more.
Yeah. And speaking of acting, I was kind of curious if you ever had a role that you did that you kind of were dreading to do, but actually it turned into being an enjoyable experience.
Oh gosh, that's a question. A role that I was dreading to do, and it turned out to be an enjoyable experience. Um, I've had roles that have worked the other way. Looking forward to do this, turned out to be a dreadful experience, but dreading to do. I don't think so. I kind of feel that's a bit of a cop out to say that, but I'll tell you why. I choose the roles that I do very carefully,
Mhm.
and I don't say yes to everything that is put on the table in front of me, because I've kind of learned over the years that to be in a to be an actor is a very particular profession in the sense that it requires 150% of you from day one. And when you're in a company of actors, whether that be on stage or on television or in film, you spend a lot of time with those people and you have to bond very quickly. And often, if
Mhm.
particularly if you're playing lovers of someone or someone's child or someone's parent, you have to kind of find a realistic way of developing that very intimate relationship very, very quickly. Because if you don't, it will come across on stage or on camera that there's no bond there. And so actors become very good at building those relationships very quickly. But it does mean that if the job is difficult or if it's for whatever reason not enjoyable, it can become very unpleasantly intense. And so I've learned to pick jobs very carefully before I do them. So, and yes, like I said, I have been surprised in the past. There's not many jobs I've done that I haven't enjoyed, but there are a couple. And, I perhaps went into them thinking they were going to be more enjoyable than they turned out to be. But all in all, Bob, I've been very lucky in my career in that I've most of the work, I'd say over 95% of the work that I've done, I've enjoyed very much. I think I came out of drama school being a bit cynical, and that stood me in good stead, that cynicism, because it has allowed me to be realistic about the industry. Not realistic enough. You don't know what this industry is like until you go into it. I mean, you really don't. And I mean, right, for the best of reasons and the worst of reasons. But I think I came out with a healthy dose of cynicism, and so I was always careful with the jobs that I chose. I was always thinking forward, what's this job going to be like to actually do? And so I've managed to dodge a lot of those bullets, I think, over the years.
So what was it? What was it that sparked your interest in acting originally?
Good question. I was going to be an archaeologist, and I sort of I did all my qualifications at school with a view to doing that. I did my work experience at the Hunterian Museum of Glasgow University as an archaeological technician when everyone else was at the local supermarket. And so, I was that's where I was heading. And I had joined the church choir. And someone heard me sing and said, "You've got quite a good voice." I said, "Oh, thanks very much." And they said, "Have you ever thought about getting it trained?" And I said, "Not really." And they said, "Well, I can put you in touch with some people," and they did. And then I sort of went to the head of music, and I went. We didn't have a headmaster at school; we had a rector, and I went to the rector who had also studied opera, and he was keen for me to. And the school paid for my singing lessons. And so I found myself studying singing. And from there, I developed this interest in musical theatre and Les Mis and all the rest of it. And I was about to go to study opera. I was about to go to what was then the Royal Scottish Academy, which is now the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. And I had a change of heart, and I kind of started to think, I'd rather be in the West End than on the opera stage. And so I switched and I went to drama school. And it was really at drama school because my view was that I would I'd go to drama school. I'd had the singing training to a certain extent. I knew how to sing. And I would go to drama school and I'd learn how to act and I'd go into musical theatre. That was my plan. And I discovered a love of straight acting there. And so although I have done lots of musical theatre over the years in the West End, I used to be in Phantom of the Opera and things like that, I developed this love almost unexpectedly for sort of straight acting. And so it kind of happened organically rather than it being, I'm going to leave school and I'm going to be an actor and this is what I want to do. It was something that I didn't fall into it either. I kind of meandered down a side road into it. Some days I'm glad I did, other days I'm not. Because I'm human. But overall, it's been a very, very interesting life.
Yeah. And it amazes me because almost every single time I talk to somebody, it's one person saying something to them that has sent their life in a different direction. Had that person never said, "Hey, you're pretty good at singing, you should go train," you wouldn't be here doing what you're doing right now. You would have been out there doing historical sites.
Yeah, I remember it was either my last year at high school or my second last year, and I did the school talent show. And I was already taking singing lessons by that time, and I was swithering about what I was wanting to do. And the person who was directing the school talent show was I think a biology teacher, I think she was, or a chemistry teacher. She worked in the science department anyway, so we had no drama department to speak of at the school, so she kind of was doing the school talent show. And I remember being told by someone that she had said, on seeing me on that stage, she had said, "John Jack will never be an actor, I can tell you that."
Wow.
Years later, as I stepped onto the stage of the Royal Albert Hall in the 25th anniversary production of The Phantom of the Opera that was being filmed live and streamed to America, Canada, Australia, Europe, and was being put onto cinematic release in cinemas throughout the world, I thought about that. And I've thought about it many times as I've stepped onto stages and I've stepped onto television sets and I've stepped onto movie sets. Many times I've thought about that and thought, had it not been for being told that that teacher said that, I wonder if I would have been so dedicated in this business. So sometimes, I guess this is a long-winded way of saying sometimes you're absolutely right, but the words are not always kind. Sometimes,
Mm.
sometimes an unkind word can be more of a catalyst for success than a kind word.
Right.
You
Right.
know, because I
And,
remember thinking, the hell I won't be. You know,
right. Right. And it's amazing the power of words, because
absolutely.
it's really incredible when you think about it. Um, and then you doing acting, you're taking words that are written down and making them come alive off of a page.
Mm,
Because you can read a sentence multiple different ways, and it
mm,
can mean different things.
mm,
So what
absolutely.
what is your process when you're coming up with a character? Um, do you just read through it and kind of have an imagination of that character in your mind?
I've been asked this many times, and I've never really had a satisfactory answer to it to give because it's something. It's why I think I perhaps wouldn't be a very good drama teacher.
Mm,
Um, I kind of do it. I don't necessarily know how to tell you to do it, and
right.
I've always been a very instinctual actor. I'm not an actor who has a process in terms of uh, character building and charting stuff out and if I'm playing a homeless person or if I'm playing a monk, I'm not going to go and live in a monastery for 12
Right.
months to see what it's like. And huge kudos to actors who practice the method, as it's called. And
Mm,
I think it's fantastic. The results that it gets are fantastic. It's just not the type of actor I am. I've always been an instinctual actor, and I've always relied upon my powers of observance. So, like I say, I have this file of almost everyone I've met, and I don't know it's there. It kind of, I don't really. It's not like I go into that file in my head and it
right.
kind of forward naturally, and I'll find myself doing things and saying things and going, "Where is this coming from?" And I realise it was probably some chap on a bus that I'd seen 3 years earlier. Um, so it kind of happens quite instinctually for me, and it happens organically as well. I kind of find characters. I kind of trip over them on the way to the toilet, and kind of go, that's useful, and so have that. So it's for me, it's a much more organic process. But I'm aware that that's not the way it is for everyone. I'm not saying that that my way works for me, but
Right.
I have huge sort of admiration for people that can really lay out their methods because I can. I kind of I find it. I
Yeah.
find it.
Well, it's kind of that way in a lot of things. Like people that play music, they can play by ear, but they can't read sheet music, that kind of thing. Or they can come up with it. They could come up with it, but they could never write down the notes of what
Mhm.
they came up with on
Mhm.
on the paper. It's always fascinating how people's minds work, and that's kind of why I ask, because I'm just interested in different people's processes, just to learn. Just um,
Mhm.
'cause like you're
I mean,
saying
this is a bit
earlier about
self-indulgent, but
wisdom.
yeah, yeah, and I think I say it's going to sound maybe a bit self-indulgent, but I think it's true, and it's certainly be true in the experience of the thousands of actors I've worked with over the last 20 years. I think actors kind of are.
Mhm.
You kind of are or you're not. You
Yeah.
you are of that personality who lends itself well to that industry, or you're not. And I don't. That's not something I say specific. What I mean is it's vocational. That's a
Mhm.
better word to use. It's. I think that's true of doctors. I think it's true of people who go into the religious world. I think it's there are certain professions which are innate personality traits that fit
Mhm.
them. They are vocational. And I think that's certainly true of acting. And I think that's possibly why I find sometimes it very difficult to explain what my process is because it kind of comes from in here rather than from. Of course, your intellect is involved with it to a certain extent, but I think if I were to approach my character formation purely intellectually, I think my performances would be pretty dry. It's got to come from here as much as anything else.
Yeah. And that's basically where you know, where your book came from too. The letters from my
Absolutely.
former self. And this is John Jack again. And you said it's out on Kindle now, and we're up to the end of the hour that I normally do, and so I wanted to have you when you release the second book, have you back on and kind of talk about that and how the experience was with writing the second one. That would be awesome.
Absolutely no problem at all. It's been an absolute pleasure, Bob. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and thank you for everybody watching. And I will see you next time. Stop waiting for life to happen and make it happen. Later, guys.
Thank you.